So rhetoric is the art of persuasion or the art of argument. It's a term that you're going to become really familiar with by the end of the semester. Rhetoric has been around for a long time, ever since people started making arguments, but the terms were coined by Aristotle. All right. One of the ideas that's going to be important as we start to think about what kinds of ideas you need to look for as you're reading arguments is the structure of argument, and that was covered in chapter 1. The structure of argument is always going to include a couple of key elements. One is a thesis statement. So when you're reading an argument, one of the things you want to look for is the thesis, and a thesis is the best statement of a main idea. So look for where does the author best state his or her main idea. So be looking for that. Next, we have evidence. Evidence is the support for your argument. This can come in statistics and facts or anecdotes and stories. It can come in logical arguments, if-then statements. So there's a lot of different places that evidence can come, but you sometimes want to look for supporting reasons, right? One more element of argument that's really important but doesn't get a lot of coverage is opposing arguments, all right? So in our class, your job is not to prove that you are right. Your job is to show a skeptical audience what value your argument holds. Maybe change their mind, maybe not. To do that, you have to show yourself as being fair and as understanding the whole issue. To do that, you have to show that you understand that when you make an argument, your audience might have some questions or some ideas that go against your argument. The writer's job, a good arguer's job, is to state those arguments and then explain why the argument might be wrong, or if it's right, explain why it's right, but that you should still kind of agree with me anyway. For example, if I said that Lakeland needed to eliminate all water bottles from campus, all disposable water bottles, and get rid of them completely in order to save on plastic, right? So I want to save the environment. People might listen to that argument and think, well, I kind of see where she's coming from, but if we stop selling water, won't people still buy soda? And that's in plastic bottles, so I'm not sure that's going to reduce plastic costs. As a writer, it's my job to acknowledge that my audience is probably thinking that, say as much in my argument, and then again, either explain why that idea is wrong, or explain why, even though that's right, we should still follow my ideas. Okay, so that's the refutation of opposing arguments. So the verb to refute means to go against. So it's sort of overturning those opposing arguments. And then you want to end with a concluding statement that restates your argument. All right, so that's the structure of argument. Most good arguments have these key elements, and the organization will differ depending on the purpose of the argument. You might, though, be looking at this and say, well, that's kind of basic. So how do I actually convince an audience of my ideas? Well, that's where ethos, pathos, and logos come in. So let's take a look at what those are. Ethos, pathos, and logos are all parts of a rhetorical triangle. Right? This isn't a real triangle, it's sort of a conceptual triangle. So the idea is that every time we speak, there are 3 important parts of the communication that happen. Right? First is the speaker. I am a writer or a speaker, I'm a part of the communication. I have to say something, right? So as a speaker, I have to build credibility. And that's what ethos is. Ethos is an appeal to authority, and it's a way to build credibility, okay? Again, that's me, the speaker. Now I have to say something, so that's the text or the context in any communication. I'm saying something, so one of the best ways to do that is through logos. Logos is an appeal to reason. So in an argument, I have to appeal to authority to build my credibility, but I also have to appeal to reason, to have solid evidence and ideas that will inform what it is that I'm saying. All right. Now that's 2 parts of the rhetorical triangle. This third part is sometimes the hardest one for people to do well, but it's the one that if you do it well, you often have a really successful argument. Okay. Pathos is an appeal to belief, values, and emotions. Right? This is an appeal to your audience. So when I might be a very credible speaker, I might have very reasonable things to say, but it's up to my audience to buy into my ideas. So one of the ways that I do that is through pathos, appeal to values and emotions. All right, so again, audience is really key when we think about reading an argument. We want to think first about who was this person writing to? Who were they trying to appeal to? Who is this audience? What do they think about? Right. So back to my water bottle example, if if I was making an argument about getting rid of the water bottles and I was making it to Lakeland students, they might have very different beliefs and attitudes than if I was making it to the Lakeland Board of Trustees, right? The Board of Trustees are high business people and other authorities from the community who make decisions about how Lakeland is run, right? They might have very different ideas. So I want to take just a minute to pause and think about this concept of audience, right? I want us to think about how we encounter audience out in the real world. So I'm going to show you a car commercial, and I want you to think about who the audience is for this car commercial, right? So as you're watching it, I want you to think about, if I were the person who was designing this commercial, right, what details did I include in the commercial to help appeal to my specific audience, right? Okay. All right, so as you can see, that car commercial is really relying on you, the consumer, to understand its message, right? There's not a lot of time. There's only 30 seconds there, okay? So some of the things that you might have noticed about the audience of that commercial, right, is that we're looking at a sort of beginning that looks like a video game, right? So we're looking at a video game sort of context. We bring in the party rock anthem, and that's a really sort of popular song. Or this commercial's a little bit old, but it was a pretty cutting edge song when it first came out. We've got dancing hamsters, right? So maybe the appeal to reason isn't the biggest thing happening here, right? So we have dancing hamsters, we have video games, we have a really current rock song. So it seems to me that this commercial is trying to appeal to a younger audience, right? Maybe fresh out of high school or maybe fresh out of college. The average new car buyer is in his or her late 30s and early 40s, so they have a lot of work to do to convince a young person to buy a car. At the end of the commercial, it also said starting at $14,000. So that's just the tiniest bit of an appeal to reason to try to communicate to the younger buyer that this is an affordable car. Right? So I want to take another example so that you can differentiate that appeal to another appeal. Right? So let's look at one more commercial with those same ideas in mind. What details are in the commercial that help appeal to a particular audience? Okay? All right, here's our other car commercial.
I read an article, well, I read the majority of an article online about how older people are becoming more and more antisocial. So I was really aggressive with my parents about joining Facebook. My parents are up to 19 friends now. I have 687 friends. This is living. It's not a real puppy. That's too small to be a real puppy.
Toyota Venza. Keep on rolling.
Okay, so we have another car commercial. This one is appealing, I think, that you'll be able to see to a little bit different audience. So we're using humor. Again, you only have 30 seconds for a car commercial, if that, so you have to catch people's attention very quickly. It's also making pop culture references, much like the last one. You have a young woman at the beginning who's obviously looking at Facebook or something and talking about friends and saying her parents don't have very many friends. Of course, that cuts into pictures of middle-aged people out riding their bikes and hanging out with their friends and really living life, right? Where the girl is just sitting on her computer and laughing at kitten pictures. Okay, so we're using pop culture references, but I think you can tell that they're poking fun at the younger person in this commercial. So the real audience for our cars here is a middle-aged crowd, right? There's no mention of the cost of the car because this is a group who can actually spend more money on a car. You have the cars associated with fun and outdoor living and all kinds of exciting things. Again, just think about these two arguments as the kinds of arguments you see every day. And as you start seeing them, I want you to start thinking about concepts of audience and support and of credibility, emotions, and logic. All right, so we're back to these three key concepts, right? Again, one is pathos, the appeal to emotions, values, and beliefs. A couple of things I want you to remember as you're reading these arguments and thinking about how they're appealing to an audience. You have to think about who is the audience. So look at where something was published. That can help. But also remember that pathos and the appeal to values is not always a good thing. Sometimes those are higher values that people are appealing to, like fairness and love, values like patriotism, diversity, justice, equality, right? But there are also lower emotions that people use to make arguments. They can be very effective, but they aren't always ethical. So for example, arguments based on people's values of greed, lust, revenge, anger. These can be effective, but they aren't very ethical. Okay, so again, pathos is the appeal to emotions. All right, ethos. When you're reading somebody's argument, I want you to think about how is this person building credibility? Are they already an authority on the issue? So think about who's writing it. If they are, look at how they're establishing trustworthiness, reliability, fairness. Is the argument well organized and logical? That can also add value. That can add credibility to the argument. And also think about who's writing it. Are they, an authority figure in their own right or an expert on the subject? Okay. All right. Again, lastly is logic. Sometimes this is hard for people to figure out how is an author using logic. This early in the semester, when we have a pretty basic understanding of these concepts, you can just look for things like evidence is one of the best places to look. So facts, case studies, numbers, statistics, experiments, any kind of anecdotes or stories that the author might tell, voices of authority that they bring in. All of these can be